So we're back for another Tornado Tales episode, and this time we're with Rick Peacock-Edwards, and he flew the F2 and F3. But Rick, do you have a few stories you can share with our viewers?
Well, I've got, hello, Mike. Nice to see you again. I've got many stories, but I think the one I'll tell you today is of time spent in the Middle East during the time that we were building up, introducing the Tornado and building up my unit, which was the first squadron to be declared, as well as being the operational conversion unit. And when I say that we had to build up the unit from scratch, from nobody being current on the aircraft, and I was the first one to start flying it in January 1985, to being fully built up and declared operational in the 31st of December 1986, it was quite a tall demand. And in all that, we had to do many other things as well. And I just want to talk a little bit about time spent, some of the other things we did. En passant, for the second half of 1986, in fact, before we got declared operational, we spent a fair bit of time in the Middle East on doing several things. First thing, and I'm not going to talk about this one, but I took the whole squadron away with the aircraft on a trail down to Cyprus. We spent a month or so in Cyprus firing the guns, which proved very successful. And as a result, we won at the first attempt the prestigious Sea Trophy, awarded to the top gun scoring squadron in 11 Group, the old fighter command. Second time was the longest sortie I did, which was 10.5 hours from Coningsby in Lincolnshire to Mazira in Oman. And that was for an exercise Safe Syria. I can talk about that separately, but that was a pretty interesting deployment in its own right. But what I'm going to talk a little bit more about is the other things we did, which was, first of all, sales of the aircraft. You know, obviously, we were the first people to fly the F2 and then the F3, and there was a fair bit of interest around the place in it, and British Aerospace, as it was then, were very keen to sell the aircraft, as were the British government. And it was interesting on that score because Saudi Arabia, for example, had bought the bomber version, the GR1 of the aircraft, and they came on a visit to Coningsby. We weren't aware of any intention of that they were going to buy the F2, F3. They spent a couple of days at Coningsby with us, and then lo and behold, the next day they go and order 24 aircraft. So that was, if that was a good sales mission, it was. I think we did them a favour there, notwithstanding all the problems we had at the time. And then there was another country, Jordan, was very interested in buying the aircraft, and they were interested in both aircraft, in fact. And I went into Jordan. Actually, it was coincided. I think came, if I recall, I think I deployed back from Oman to Cyprus, where I joined together. I took two, I think it was two Tornado F3s, and we linked up with a couple of Tornado GR1s. I don't think they had the four then. And we took four Tornadoes into Jordan. Can't remember the exact airfield where we went to, but it was an interesting trip in because I don't have to tell you that the Middle East is an interesting place. It's an interesting place today. It was an interesting place back in those days too. And Jordan is very close to countries like Israel, and there are only certain routes you can get in to the country. So it was a fairly, and of course, you know, we were fighters, being in a sort of place that we weren't that used to being at the time. So interesting sortie getting into Jordan. We did get into Jordan, and we had a very lovely time there. In fact, we spent basically a couple of days with the Jordanian Air Force, and they flew with us in the Tornado F2 and the GR1. It was interesting. King Hussein spent a whole day with us. In fact, he joined
Wow.
us join us at breakfast, listen to the brief, listen to the debrief from the first sortie. We all had lunch together, and then he did exactly the same in the afternoon. And so he was a lovely man. He was so interested in the military, quite frankly, and in what we were doing there. And it's one of those days I'll never forget. A lovely day spent with King Hussein. And in fact, just a little aside, in fact, the day after, because we stayed at a hotel in Oman, I think it was, and the day after we went down to the Dead Sea, which is, I scored 2 firsts on that day. I had a swim in the Dead Sea and discovered all about floating and reading the newspaper, a sea of salt,
Yeah.
basically. And I went camel racing for the first time as well.
Wow.
We had a lot of fun there. In the end, Jordan didn't buy the aircraft, but they were certainly interested in it, and I think it was for different reasons. But all I can say is I'd love to go back to Jordan sometime. I thought it was a lovely country. I had met some of the Jordanian Air Force beforehand, and I'd always liked them, and it was really nice to get together with such a friendly group of people, and like-minded people, obviously sort of fighter pilots as far as I was concerned.
Mm-hmm.
King Hussein has always had a very big interest in flying. I mean, he was very involved with the Royal International Air Tattoo back in the UK. So that was a memorable experience. I just wish we had digital cameras in those days and things like that.
That would have been amazing.
I've missed so many opportunities to take photographs. The next time we flew back to the UK from there, via Cyprus again, and then tanked our way back to the UK, which itself was interesting because we came back with TriStar tankers, and at that time, this is the mid-1980s, the TriStar was still very much new to the RAF tanking fleet. And in fact, it only had an interim clearance, which made it did have sort of one or two interesting little anomalies, as I recall, with how the basket sort of floated around behind it. But anyway, we got back and enjoyed the trip all round. And then the next thing I was told, right, just as we really coming up to the final parts of being declared, I was asked, could I cope with a Middle East sales tour, which obviously British Aerospace were very keen for us to do, and the British government was very keen for us to do as well. And I was asked, could I cope with it? Well, I must admit, I've always been a can-do man rather than can't-do man, yeah. And it's always paid off, quite frankly. If I say I'll do it, I'll do it, and we did it. And all I can say at this point is, having done it, we achieved absolutely everything we had to achieve in that 2 years building up to operational status. So it was worth it. And I took several aircraft, Tornado F2s, F3s again, on a Middle East sales tour, which, as I recall, the MOD did not have to fund. And we went to Abu Dhabi, and we went to, as I recall, Abu Dhabi, Bahrain, and Doha. I've always found, I didn't know the Middle East then as well as I do now, but I certainly discovered what an interesting place the Middle East is. How the towns that you see there are so absolutely splendid, which I had never really properly appreciated. And of course, the climate is somewhat different from the UK.
Yeah, but
but wherever we went, we were well looked after, and we showed our wares. And in particular, talk about Qatar. In fact, we flew into Doha, and we were met there by Mirages from the Qatari Air Force, and they escorted us into Doha.
Wow.
And of course, I hadn't fully appreciated then also that there were one or two ex-RAF pilots. In my case, they'd been flying Lightnings with me.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Who were flying down in Doha. So it was a bit of a reunion as well as anything else. Um, and of course, I think in those days, Qatar was somewhat of a new name to me as a country. But of course, these days, it's very much that we're talking now. I mean, it's that's 1986, and we're nearly 2026. That's nearly 40 years ago, if you think about it. It's amazing. But
Yeah.
all I say is Qatar has come a long way in that time. But why did I say talk to all about that? Because I was offered the opportunity time and again to do things which were an experience. And if I'd said no,
Yeah.
you wouldn't have had, I and others from the squadron would not have had the opportunity to do what we did. And it wasn't just for ourselves either. We were doing things in some cases, like the gun firing and the exercise in Oman. It was to help us towards our operational declaration. But in other cases, like the trip to Jordan and the Middle East sales tour, it was very much a collective trip to help British industry. And we achieved all the aims. So I really can't complain at all, except to say once again, and I still am, I'm a can-do man, and, and I will never turn down an opportunity. I've always said that I like people who are can-do people and have a constructive approach to life. If they can't do people, then they're negative as far as I'm concerned, and they have a destructive approach to life. So you can tell which sort of people I like and which sort of people I don't like. I think I
Yeah.
better stop there.
Yeah, absolutely, Rick. Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you on that. So just kind of backtracking a bit. So this kind of sales tour, what did you have to do? Did you have to do like a kind of aero display to show what the aircraft could do, or was it engineers on the ground saying like this does that, or how did it all work on that tour?
We had to give a presentation about the aircraft, talk about it and its capabilities. That's then I can't recall. We had an engineer. We had a Hercules coming around with us. I think we did have an engineer for part of the time. He would have undoubtedly they would have been looking at the engineering side, but
Mhm.
I think quite frankly that they would have probably come back to the UK to have a closer look at the engineering side.
Mhm.
Um, and of course we flew. They flew with us too.
Mhm.
And when they flew with us, they said it was very much what do you want to do? Well, most times they want to do combat, which
Right.
suits me fine. Combat, as far as I'm concerned, is the sport of kings.
Absolutely.
In those days, in the Tornado F3, it did provide its own challenge, as you know well, because we didn't have a perfect weapon radar or weapon system in those days, and so in a convincing way for them was not always as easy as it might have seemed. So it was a challenge. But they basically want to see they not only want to see the aircraft, how the aircraft operates, they want to see how it flies as well. And you've heard from plenty of people that the Tornado is a beautiful aircraft to fly. It's got a very quiet cockpit. It did have its deficiencies, in as much it was a hot ship. It was a really fast aircraft at low level. It turned well at low level, but the engines were sort of very much designed for low level. And in the medium level areas, it tended to be a bit short on puff. When we get up to height, once we got it supersonic, uh, it was a superb aircraft. Once it was supersonic with the wings back,
Oh
it
yeah.
really did rocket away. Um, but it did have its deficiencies in the engine area. In those days, it had its deficiencies in the radar as well, which are well chronicled.
So, like on this kind of sales tour and stuff like that, did you were you always on, or did you have a bit of like rest time, or were you always like an ambassador for the area for the Tornado Panavia, or did you say like, right, I'm having a day, I'm going to go and do my own thing?
We were very much in their hands, quite frankly.
Right,
If they want to do something, we did it. But
right,
most of the time, it had been sort of pre-agreed. And so there was free time as well. And I mentioned the fact that we went and down to the Dead Sea and swam in the Dead Sea and
So you got a
went
bit of
camel.
a, oh no.
That was dead time. But we didn't have that much time. We weren't there for that long. So we did have a bit of social time in the hotel. Particularly, it was a very good Hercules crew were with us as well. They were full of fun. I remember that.
Yeah.
It was an experience. The longest flight that was to Oman. Um,
Oh, right.
it was in a thing called Exercise Safe Syria 1, Exercise Swift Sword. It was tri-service. We were working with the Omani forces, so it was not just Air Force, it was Army and Navy as well. It was a big exercise, but as far as we were concerned, it was the first time we'd really deployed such length, and the we were deploying direct from Coningsby in Lincolnshire to Nazira in Oman. It took, as I said, 10 and a half hours, and it was designed, amongst other things, to show the global reach that we had. We actually took off from Coningsby at 11 o'clock at night. It was 4 aircraft went down, and so we had the first 6 hours of the trip down were at night,
Oh, God.
which is, you know, night is more challenging than day for a start. But when we got, remember and going over France, you've always got probably French air traffic in those days to sort of deal with. Although going with the tanker looks after you. The tanker is known as mother, and we the fighters are chicks.
Chicks, yeah.
But it did get interesting down over the Mediterranean because it was very stormy in the Mediterranean. So there we were, a tanker and 4 chicks with electric storms all around us, trying to avoid them as best we can at night. It was a challenging situation. And we wouldn't go down with the same tanker all the way because, you know, a tanker would take us down and then hand over to another one. About dawn time, we were approaching Cyprus. It was nice to see the dawn. I remember that. And of course, by that stage, we were back in rather stable air. And the then Commander in Chief of Strike Command, Air Chief Marshal Peter Harding, Sir Peter Harding, who I knew very well, he'd said to me, "Rick, you know, you've got to be there at 9:30 in the morning. The VIP sort of we'll be expecting you there. We'll be in the stand waiting, and you better not be late." Well, we weren't late. We were there. We were there to the second, I'm pleased to say.
Wow. Really?
So that was, but that was at the end of a 10.5 hour flight. Yeah, it was nice to get out of the cockpit.
I can imagine. Good
We
stuff.
were greeted, and Sir Peter himself came and sort of said, great to see you guys here. Congratulations. And we were a new aircraft. It was a long way. It was the first time we'd really deployed. And in fact, even before that, because to make sure we were used to long trips, we actually we did some training back in the UK, sort of day into night sorties with the tanker aircraft. We go around the UK on long 6 or 7 hour sorties,
Wow.
just to sort of get ourselves familiar with the sort of the environment and the time taken.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a pretty important mission, and it was great fun down there. Oman is a beautiful place. I will never forget the sunsets in Oman. Never. Just a beautiful, beautiful sunsets, and lovely people. And we were exceedingly well looked after, particularly by an Omani Air Commodore who I've been at staff college with, who is now sort of in a very important position and destined to be Chief of the Air Force, I feel. Unfortunately,
Wow.
he died not long after we met him down there in an aircraft accident, which was very sad. Good man.
Mm. But yeah, Rick, thank you very much for sharing a few stories there. But obviously, you're an author as well. I'm sure many of viewers know that already. But in case they don't, you've got Rate a Climb and Nat Boys. So where can we find them at, Rick? Rate of Climb. That's your first
There's
book.
Rate of Climb, first book. That is on sale in with Amazon, and in fact, there's a softback version now, which, funnily enough, has a different cover on it. It has a lightning on the cover.
Oh, really?
And
Did
and
you
it's
choose
cheaper.
that?
Together with the publisher,
Right.
A lightning, anything to do with lightning,
It's true.
and the lightning I absolutely love, as you know.
Yes.
But the lightning is iconic, and it sells
It is.
books. Let me tell you that.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And that's that one. And this is the other one, Nat Boys, which is another great book. Some fantastic stories in there about the Nat. I'm actually writing my third book now.
Yeah. Tell us about that, Rick.
It's about my father. It's called Teddy Peacock-Edwards, a Battle of Britain pilot and World War II ace. By me, basically, his second generation fighter pilot son. So I'm making slow progress with that one, but I'm glad I'm writing it. So that's my third book. And then, let me tell you, I'm contracted actually to write a fourth book.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which I shall do when I finish the book about my father, and that is about my flying experience in the Lightning.
Wow. Okay, that's one to look out for. Certainly for Lightning fans there. Yeah, brilliant stuff. Is that like years to come, or is that like once that your third book is finished, or are you straight into the next?
I think hopefully the book about my father will be available in probably September time on the market. I think the lightning book, which in many ways will be easier for me to write, the book about my father, I've had to do quite a lot of research as well.
Yes, of course.
Whereas a lot about the lightning is my own stories about my time flying the Lightning.
Mm-hmm.
That will come straight out of my head mainly, and so I anticipate that being early next year. Well, by the start of the display season, shall we say?
Cheers, Rick.
It's always good to see you, Mike.